Welcome to this very special joint episode. Today, we're bringing on two conversations, Beating Sisyphus, where we explore how innovation emerges under pressure, and Tres Respuestas, a space dedicated to leaders and thinkers shaping Latin America. My name is Thomas Riveros, and I co-host alongside Lourdes Casanova, the director of the Canizares Center. In this episode, we are incredibly honored to welcome on President Iván Duque, who served as President of Colombia from 2018 to 2022, following a 13-year career shaping policy at the Inter-American Development Bank, along with time in the Colombian Senate. President Duque, it's an incredible honor to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Tomas, and thank you so much, Lourdes. It's a great honor for me to be not only co-sharing this space, but also exchanging ideas with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So before we begin with the deep political and economic questions that we want to discuss today, I have perhaps what is the most difficult question of the entire interview. Because after doing a little bit of research on yourself, President Duque, I found that in addition to being a global leader, you're also a DJ known as DJ Duke. So I wanted to hear who are your top three artists of all time?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Tomas. I love music. I've always had a passion for music. I used to have a rock band in the 90s. I was lead vocal in a rock band, and I played the rhythm guitar now and then. I've always had music close to me. And when I left office, I wanted to learn something new. And that's why I started DJing as a hobby, and I enjoy doing it. And I've done some performances in some relatively public spaces, but all for charity and philanthropic purposes in order to mobilize resources to the foundation that we have founded in Colombia with my wife called Innovation for Development, I+D. So yeah, I do that. I enjoy it. I like to start listening to new rhythms. I like to mix. And it's part of my life. It's actually a good way for me to disconnect. But going to the second part of your question, which is the best artist of all time, I think that's too much of a question. I can tell you that I have some favorite bands. Actually, here in my office, I think I have close by a box that I have of all the Led Zeppelin albums. I love Led Zeppelin. I obviously love the Beatles. And I think I also like bands like Dire Straits, Supertramp, many of the bands of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But I also have a passion for example, Cat Stevens. I like his music. I like Paul Simon. I like Bob Dylan. I am pretty open in my musical taste, and also if it comes to a more traditional early stage of rock, obviously Elvis, but also blues and jazz. I mean, I love Neil Armstrong. So yeah, I have that passion, but I also have enjoyed the pleasure of our folk music in Colombia and folk music in Latin America. So it's very difficult for me to say which are my three top artists of all time, but I think I've shared some of my favorites that are always in my playlists.
Incredible.
Thank you. President Iván Duque, you were also we had the privilege to have you as inaugural Distinguished Fellow at the Canizares Center for Emerging Markets, and your continuing work with the center and also with Cornell. Also, you have a love for academics because you are also Distinguished Fellow at Oxford University. So understanding the music and the culture has been one of your contributions to economics and policy. You are also an academic at heart. And as you demonstrate in a book you co-authored, The Orange Economy, cultural goods are a critical but often overlooked aspect of modern economies. What made you realize the importance of looking to cultural assets as opposed to capital assets? Maybe the love of music you have just mentioned.
Well, I have a passion for history, Lourdes, and you know that pretty well. And in my maybe teenage time, I went to Greece for a 4-month program at the Tasis Hellenic International School. And I was highly exposed to the traditional ancient Greek culture. And we had a great conversation about Pericles, who ruled Athens, and his time was known as the Pericles century. And what defined him was that he also gave a lot of importance to cultural assets. And that captured my attention since then. And as I was growing up, I started reading about cultural economy. The early works of Nestor Garcia Canclini was one of the great Latin Americanists who thought about the cultural economy of a region. And then I also started reading the books of Stephen Hawkins, not the scientist, but a cultural economist who started putting numbers into the value of the creative economy. So, with that said, I started growing my passion for culture and economics. And I always defined that cultural assets are as important to a society as any other form of traditional infrastructure, energy infrastructure, or connectivity. And especially because it also works based on human talent. When people can work where their talent is, you're actually propelling the human capital, which is way different of just having people employed in whatever they found. That's a big difference. So when I realized that we had to give a new message for the people who are regularly looking at these numbers and understanding how this impact economic growth, we started working with Felipe Huitrago earlier in the last decade, and we definitely saw that it was very important to look at what the numbers reveal. The orange economy, which is the creative economy that involves cultural assets, the arts, media, functional elements of creativity, uh, patrimony, heritage, all those sectors in a country like the US are above 7% of GDP. And in a country like mine, it's more than 5% of GDP, which means it's bigger than the coffee economy, bigger than the mining economy, maybe as big as the tourism economy. So the weight of all this has to allow us to wake up and understand that it's as important to look at science as a trigger of development as it is with culture and especially with talent. And that's why we started that work. And let me tell you something interesting. Last week, in a US university, there was a study that was presented by an academic that basically evaluated the whole orange economy policy during my administration. And basically, it shows that it triggered new forms of entrepreneurial spirit, that it created new jobs that became of one of the most vibrant and rapidly growing sectors in the Colombian economy. So that proved that when you have a policy that is top down, that is aimed to look at this sector as an engine of economic growth, as an engine of new jobs, as an engine of technological transformation, well, you have there an immense potential. And that's why I have been so committed to this. And that's why I've also been helping some other countries in Latin America and other parts of the world to have the orange economy as one of the greatest engines of the next cycle of economic growth. And let me finish by saying something interesting. When you look at the performance of the Colombian economy in the last 2 years, the orange economy has been the fastest growing sector. And that just demonstrates that our policy focus was in the right direction, and we have been creating new opportunities since then.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's certainly an area that merits a lot more exploration and something that is very important for modern economies today. And you mentioned it was really in your early years that you understood the value of cultural goods, with that trip that you got to take to Greece. And I wanted to, turn to those early years and, hear a little bit more about your principles and values, in particular about your beliefs that, you learned and have stayed with you and guided you throughout the rest of the years.
I have been, since very early in my life, a passionate follower of Stoicism. I think Stoicism is, some people call it a philosophical school, but I tend to look to it more like an auto governance school. So the four core values of Stoicism that are courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, those four values for me have become always very important. But they are also strictly connected with some of the concepts that the Stoics wanted to achieve. One is the meaning of arete, which is the ancient Greek term that defined the constant search for improving ourselves, which at the end takes you to another concept they shared that was called eudaimonia, which was the yourself flourishing. And that's something that you have to pursue every time. But also the concept of amor fati, which is to love destiny, to live the present, and combine it with the concept of memento mori, that we all know we're going to die, and that since we know we're going to die, every day must be for us an adventure of self satisfaction based on good behavioral patterns that carry us to reach arete by being good human beings. So, those concepts, which also include not suffering for the things that you can't control and being able to manage the way you react, even to adversity or to tragedy or to difficult situations. Those are elements that have nurtured my life since a very early part of my life. I mean, I started young listening to this, and then I started trying to practice every day those principles. And I've added some more. I think austerity, which means not being attached to material aspirations or dominated by the acquisition and maybe accumulation of material assets. Being able to realize the simplicity of life, don't being ever a cocky person that feels on top of the rest of the human beings, but instead not feeling above anyone and not feeling below anyone. Those are elements that I've carried out in my whole life and that have allowed me to go to bed with a sense of pleasure, of gratitude, and commitment. And I remember that I had that conversation with some of my students in the past, and I said, well, making the decision of what kind of person you want to be is very important. And I decided a long time ago that I want to be a good person. And it's not something that you achieve overnight. It might take you years, decades, if not your whole life experience. But you have to conduct yourself always trying to make good and to be good. And those are elements that for me were nurtured by my access to Stoicism, but also were highly motivated as well by faith. I'm a Catholic, but I'm a person of faith, and by trying to be thankful with life, with God, with family, and with everything that surrounds us, including adversity, if that's the case.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Very, very inspiring, and reminding us that Stoicism is, we need a lot of being able to be stoic against adversity, mainly. Going also staying in values, but what you think is the political and economic philosophy that you were exposed that later in the Inter-American Development Bank, and also that have stuck with you during your political career? So what type of political and economic philosophy have you adhered to?
That's very important, Lourdes, because I mean I am a true believer in capitalism, in the virtues, the objectives, and the essence of capitalism. But I'm also a believer in the concept of equity, which means not to give everybody the same, but try to guarantee that everybody has the right access to opportunities in order to flourish. And that's why, when it comes to my political ideological definition, I have always defined myself as a radical centrist, which means I want to radically protect the center, which is the balance of democracy. That means that you can defend a market economy, but you can also defend the nature of guaranteeing that you have not only a good treatment but opportunities for employees, that you can defend industrialization, and hand in hand you can defend environmental protection, that you can defend security as a public asset, but at the same time in attachment to the protection of human rights. So trying to protect that center means a lot. And when it comes to economic political thought, I've always defined myself as a true believer in the free markets. But the fact is that even if you're a capitalist and you have a market economy, you need to guarantee that the state can also solve many of the market failures that do exist and will continue to exist. And that takes me to the idea that was used in a certain time in Germany. That was the concept of, how may I say it in Spanish, economía social de mercado, and social economic market economy, which means you have to develop markets at its best, but you also need to guarantee there is enough social investment to close the social gaps and empower the people in need to be able to get access to the right opportunities so that they can not only flourish, but contribute to the improvement and constant improvement of society.
Mm. Yeah, so I know there really the importance of striking a balance between these two extremes that we often are faced with in political and economic discussions. And of course, you have still a strong base, right? And you still understand what you believe from a market perspective, and of course, from the political perspective as well. Now, I wanted to ask, in the context of the presidency, Colombia faced, persistent fiscal deficits along with a large current account deficit. All of that putting, of course, a downward pressure on the exchange rate, making things quite challenging when you took office. So, how did you manage to continue holding that balance between market economy, but also needing to have the correct social measures and having?
When you think about fiscal prudence, when you think about sound financials for a state, you're actually protecting the whole society. And by the time I was sworn in, I inherited a 4% to fiscal deficit, which was pretty high at its time. I remembered that we had a very mediocre economic growth rate in 2018. We were just barely above 2%. And the year before, we were 1.7%. So as I assumed office, we reduced taxes on corporations, we expanded the tax base, and we also started using more intelligent tools like electronic invoicing in order to fight tax evasion. We were able also to get more investment in the country and improve the collections. But basically, what I learned at that time, it was that if we give the right signals, we're going to be able to have a stronger economic growth. So by the end of 2019, we had doubled the economic growth of 2017. We had grown 40% above the previous year of my predecessor. And most importantly, we reached the first primary fiscal surplus since we had ever adopted the fiscal rule. The sad part of that is that 3 months after, I had to face a pandemic like the rest of the world, and we had to increase again the fiscal deficit and the indebtedness ratios so that we could manage such an unexpected crisis as it was COVID-19. But even considering that we had a negative growth of minus 6.5% in 2020, the decisions we made, the expansion of the social safety net, the protection of the payroll, all ensured that by 2021, our economy was going to reboot stronger than many other economies around the world. And that's why in 2021, we grew above 10.2% and 8.5% in 2022 by the end of my administration. That meant that we were able to have the years of the largest economic growth ever held in Colombia, at least in more than a century. And it happened because, yes, we knew we had to expand expenditure, but we also knew that we had to do this with fiscal prudence. So that's why we created a roadmap so that we went back to be at the levels of achievement of the fiscal policy long-term planning. And that was something quite unique because we never had a playbook to manage a pandemic. And by the end of the pandemic, Colombia was ranked number 1 in LATAM in the Bloomberg Resilience Index. It was the Bloomberg COVID-19 Resilience Index, and we ranked number 1 in LATAM and number 2 in the Western Hemisphere after Canada, which involved not only how strong you vaccinated, how rapidly you vaccinated, how you recovered the healthcare system, but most importantly, how do you recover the whole economic system? And that's why we felt very proud of being top leaders in health management, but also top leaders regionally in terms of triggering new and vibrant economic growth in order to get the economy back where it should be after such a tragedy like COVID-19.
You mentioned the pandemic as really an unexpected, a terrible tragedy, but you also had to face a Category 5 hurricane, and also you faced and you approved one of the largest migrations in human history, millions of Venezuelans seeking refuge in Colombia. So how were you able to navigate so many adversities within your mandate as
Well,
president?
the first thing, Lourdes, back to Stoicism, never whine, never complain, embrace the moment, amor fati, love destiny, face the present, don't shy away, and thank God and life for adversity. Adversity comes to improve you. Adversity comes to test you. And adversity requires and demands the best of you. And I think we did our best with a great team in order to recover Colombia, in order to vaccinate, in order to have a vibrant economic recovery and growth. But also we gave some messages that were very important. We opened our arms to more than 2 million Venezuelans, brothers and sisters, that had left their country seeking opportunities. So we grant them full rights, with the exception of political rights, for 10 years, so that they could be visible, open a bank account, enter the social security system, actively participate in society. And it became one of the engines of new entrepreneurial spirit in the country. And also, it became very important in terms of demand for products and services. And it became an instrument of very important political and economic action. Just if you consider that since we adopted the temporary protection status for the 2 million Venezuelans, multidimensional poverty has dropped, informality rates have dropped, unemployment rates have dropped. It meant and showed that that policy was successful on its merits. And yes, we had to also face a hurricane Category 5. Nobody was prepared to face a Katrina, especially in an archipelago that is 800 kilometers away from the shore of Cartagena. We didn't have a port. We just had a small deck that was absolutely destructed. But we were able to put our ingenuity and creativity to remove the rubbles, protect the communities, put the tents, supply the food, give them access to vaccination, and being able to put the whole place back together in the islands of Providencia and Santa Catalina in less than 1 year and a half. So it all proved that, yes, it was a challenge. We had to face multidimensional crisis, but you have to define the team, the method, and how do you expect to be the outcome. Those things were very important for our work.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of your recent episodes actually highlighted a Harvard economist, I believe, came on the show and discussed the actual economic impact of that immigration policy and how successful it was in promoting economic growth and improving not only the lives of those Venezuelans, but Colombians as well. And I wanted to ask, in general, we've seen in Latin America and maybe across the world, maybe a little bit more of a turn towards liberalism in the sense of an economic policy and maybe in some ways towards liberal democracy. I wanted to ask, what are some ways that you think we can go about further promoting the ideas of economic freedom and democracy worldwide?
What happens with democracy is that sometimes it's taken for granted. But I have to say that, yes, there are rich countries in the world that have authoritarian regimes. The question is, are they capitalist? Yeah, they might be capitalist, but they're not free economies because they're planned, they're excessively dominated by the state, they have intrusive mechanisms of the state, they limit, in some ways, who manages what. So I don't like that model. The model that I like is the model where people can have ingenuity, people can express what they feel, they can tell others what they feel, they can organize, they can found parties, they can create unions if you want. There's a sense of liberty with responsibility. And that is what guarantees in a society that you don't have prosperity in authoritarian regimes. Because when the state wants to control everything, you're not free. You've never heard of the Chinese dream. And I'm not criticizing. China has their methods, they have their mechanisms, they have been able to transform their society, reduce poverty, and so on. But the fact is, they are not a free economy, a free market economy. So to defend democracy, it's a way of defending a market economy. It's also a way of defending ingenuity, entrepreneurial spirit, and the capacity to transform sectors, even being able to express whatever you want on every single matter. So I am a defender of democracy as the most effective mechanism we have ever had to propel individual liberties and create economic values and economic returns. And I think we have to look to this topic that particular way. I'm a liberal. I defend the free market economy. I've always defended it, but I still believe there have to be mechanisms so that free trade is also a win-win for all who participate in those lines of commerce.
We now would like to turn to the initiatives that you have spearheaded since you left the presidency. One is the Fundación Innovación para el Desarrollo, that you categorize, very rightly so, as a think and do tank, where you engage in research, but most importantly, you invest in the next generation of dreamers and makers. And you spend a lot of time with them so that to teach and they learn about social entrepreneurship, public value, and environmental sustainability. Would you please say more about this extraordinary initiative?
Well, thank you for those comments, Lourdes. As you know, with my wife, Maria Juliana, we wanted to create a philanthropic venture, and that's why we created I+D as a think and do tank. So we work on the think side of the business as how do we create content and value and contribution in entrepreneurship, in sustainability, in public value, and social mobility. So that's why we work, we analyze, we produce knowledge, we have all kinds of interesting debates, and we share that content in a massive way. But as a do tank, we have focused ourselves in being an incubator of young social innovation leadership in the country, in places that are part of the profound Colombia, for kids that don't have access to any opportunity, but they have proven with the record that they have their leaders that are transforming their communities. And they can also meet those who have plenty And that exchange of ideas, backgrounds, and knowledge is what we call the estrato talento, which is we privilege talent and we allow those who have never had the opportunity to take it and those who have enjoyed the opportunity forever, they have also the responsibility of discussing, talking, and co-creating with the other participants. So we're now in our third cohort. We have selected in a very rigorous process more than 150 participants per year. And out of that number, we select a group of 25 that goes to an international acceleration program in DC, in Madrid. We've taken groups to Israel. We've taken some groups to Thailand and to Greece. And we feel proud that as a foundation, we are making a difference by giving those opportunities. And we walk the walk and we talk the talk and we make things happen because we're highly committed that this is not theoretical, that we need to help the families transform their income, their contribution to society, and that they feel protected and secure.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think, the fact that you are helping bring up these new leaders and engaging in those conversations is absolutely spectacular. And in addition to the Fundación de Innovación para el Desarrollo, you also helped found the Concordia Amazonas, which is meant to help promote private sector commitment to the protection of the Amazon rainforests. Could you tell us a little bit more about this initiative, how it came about, and what you guys are currently working on?
Well, we created the Concordia Amazon Initiative with Matthew Swift and the support also of Libra Group and Concordia Summit as the way in which we will take people that are highly influential in the sustainability world every year for 3 days to be in the heart of the Amazon, be with nature, be with indigenous communities, live our titles aside, and be able to create long-term alliances in order to build market-driven, nature-based solutions that can effectively contribute to the present and future of the Amazon. That will create an aggregated value chain, that will have much better logistics, that will have much more tourists, and that it also becomes a place that is a reference model for development. And that's why we had our first meeting in Ecuador. We made a lot of progress. Second meeting, we were in Guyana. We saw how Conservation International supported Guyana in one of the most important projects of national conservation of species. We basically also call for smart finance that go from guarantee to policy-based loans to direct loans to bonds and credits as effective ways to putting money into the need of being able to defeat the patterns and traces of this climate crisis that we're all suffering nowadays. So that initiative has become not only a very influential one, but has been the one that has been involving other heads of state, leaders from the private sector, leaders from philanthropy, and all come together to identify those market-driven, nature-based solutions. So that's why this summit is so important.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely incredible and very important to be highlighting the need to conserve the Amazon rainforest, not only for their cultural value, but also, of course, the global importance in terms of CO2 reduction and the oxygen that, of course, we all need to survive. I wanted to ask then a question for the audience that is younger, that's listening to this show. What, if you were in their shoes, what message would you have for them? What ideas would you want them to be thinking about to make a difference in the world?
The first thing is to enjoy life without being so captured by digital consumption. I think when we see generations that are trapped in this infinite scrolling, and they become addicted to satisfy every single sentiment of boredom by getting their cells in their hands, I think they're committing grave mistakes. And this is not thinking old. This is not thinking against technology. I don't have anything against technology. I don't have anything against improving our society through technology. But I think the fact that boredom is a driver of creativity and innovation. And we don't allow ourselves to feel that way because we're trapped in the infinite scrolling. That is something that can mess up many life projects. That's something that can derail a lot of life projects. So it's very important to use technology, but still be analog. Write down in a diary, write your thoughts, carry notes every day. Allow yourself to be fully aware without having to use headphones for half an hour and breathe nature and relax. Concentrate yourself on sleep and good habits and reading and mingling with people that are not toxic, people that are not chit chatting on the backs of others, but people that can really improve and accelerate your own condition as a human being. So that combination of things is something I think the younger generation should have, because we have a generation that has become highly dependent on all these technologies and that are becoming more isolated from the social exchange that is pretty much needed for our own lives and create our own peace of mind and make us much better. So I will say continue with the idea of improvement, but not improvement just based on what are your KPIs, but structural, humanistic, and soul improvement, which is very important today if you want to be an entrepreneur, a politician, or in any other areas, even a scientist or a musician. So try to concentrate on that. Try to concentrate on asking the right questions, and don't allow yourself to be captured just as another number that is highly influenced by a pre-programmed algorithm that is just going to throw you the things that you're consuming without allowing you to judge based on your own criteria what is happening in a society and what should be your decision in that society in order to create improvement. Not just be captured or tortured by the idea that you're part of a premeditated gang of radicals from one side or another. Allow yourself to be constant seekers of the truth and be truly independent seekers of the truth. Those are things that I would recommend to the younger generations.
And one of the ideas that you've highlighted in your podcast is this idea of humanism and Christian humanism in particular. How do you think young people can apply that in their lives?
Well, I more than calling for Christian humanism, I call for people to think of humanism as this way of living in which we all have to contribute to have a much better society. It's not just looking at KPIs.
Mm.
I mean, I don't have an issue with that we have testing like the PISA scores, which are ways to determine how good is an education system when it comes to math, science, and language. But there are things that are more important than that, and it's the quality of human beings that are going to graduate and that are going to contribute to society, influence society. You need to have persons that are good persons, that have the right habits, the right values, the right commitments. And that is something in which the education system needs to contribute a lot. But that is what I consider the most important thing today. That we keep on nurturing those elements. That we have more people decided and committed to be courageous, to have temperance, which means to be stable, calm, reflexive, and focused, even in the worst times of adversities. People that, when they practice justice, is how they treat others with good manners, with respect, and the wisdom, which is also part of being every day more demanding and maybe more anxious about how do you nurture yourself into a more disciplined and sympathetic with others kind of person, which is the sympatheia that the Stoics also promoted. That I think it's the best way for me to respond to your question.
Yeah, thank you.
That's very interesting and inspiring. and thought-provoking closing comments. But we always finish this podcast and webinar with one last question. Because we are within emerging markets, so which emerging market you would highlight today and why?
Lourdes, I will highlight the emerging markets that have been able to create development, expand the middle class in democratic systems. Autocratic regimes are there. They have their own merits. They have achieved a lot. But the fact is, a prosperous society can only take place where there is freedom and democracy. Not just where there is capitalism and authoritarianism. There are countries that have been very rich by doing that. But are they the right innovators? Are they the ones who are going to win the future? I don't think so. Because I think the right emerging markets are the ones that know that democracy has a cost, that democracy takes longer, that you have to bridge the divide, that you have to generate consensus. And I rather prefer that than just having a caudillo or an authoritarian party or an authoritarian system that tells what people should do and that are always present in such a way that people feel intimidated by the government. In any free society, people can't feel intimidated by the government. They have to follow rule and order, their law and order, and the law and order apparatus has to work. But they have to feel free, think free, act free in order to be prosperous. So when it comes to emerging markets, my favorite emerging markets are those that at a very high cost have been able to create great transformations through democratic means, which for me is the essence of a real, true free market economy.
Yeah, so we need the two elements, both democracy and free markets, working together to promote that economic growth and the freedom that we all so desire, for emerging markets and the world in general. And I wanted to thank you very much, President Duque, for taking the time to speak with us today. It was an incredible honor.
It's been a great honor, Thomas, and a great honor, Lourdes. Thank you so much. And I'm so delighted that we have collaborated also with Tres Respuestas today.
Thank you very much. And really a great privilege, and looking forward to continuing the collaboration with you and your team in the Fundación Innovación y Desarrollo. Thank you very much.
So much.
Absolutely. Well, for the Canizares Center and Beating Sisyphus, along with Tres Respuestas, we thank you all very much for watching today's episode.